Great. Good morning. Thank you so much for sitting through presentations all day today and next week on the capital budget. We're very excited to bring you this information. And I wanted to start by introducing some of our new team members. I don't think any of them are here in person today, but wanted to introduce you to our new team members and also give an update in case the commission wasn't aware that Kristen Ahern is no longer with the department. She left around Thanksgiving last year, so she is sorely missed. We are hiring a CIP supervisor, so if you know of anyone, please send them my way. It is posted online. The job is open now. But we do have two recent hires, Shakia Word and Nelson Vasconcelos, and I'm working on the pronunciation of his name. They are our new CIP analysts, and they are going to be working with a portfolio of agencies. So you can see here, which agencies each of them is focused on. And then also as part of the team is Eli Pousson, who has already been with the planning department and worked with us a little bit last year, but has been working with us even more and is now officially in a role of assisting with the CIP. So he's been helping us with Adaptive, which is our new system for collecting requests. He's been doing a lot of our data management and setting up reports. Thank you. So just a little bit of background, primarily for the public. I think the commission is aware, but by city charter, the Planning Commission must submit a recommendation for the 6-year capital improvement program to the Board of Estimates. And the first year of that 6-year program becomes the capital component of the Ordinance of Estimates. Laura mentioned this morning that the operating budget and the capital budget come together each year in the Ordinance of Estimates, which is adopted by the City Council. And we begin this process anew each year. So although we prepare a 6-year program, we revisit it every year. I do want to highlight for you that we are not starting from scratch anymore, that we are using, that we are now very excited to be using the prior 6-year program as the starting point, and it will make comparisons much easier. So we expect in the future to have a report available for you that compares what was approved in last year's program versus what agencies are requesting now. So we're really excited about that.
That makes me so happy.
Yes, me too, actually, yes. Let's see if I know where to point this. Yes, no? It worked before and it stopped. All right, so the Board of Estimates sets a policy for what a capital improvement is. It's a physical betterment or improvement or any preliminary studies related to it. It is not improvements costing less than $50,000. That was a threshold that was set many years ago. Maybe it's time to revisit this definition, including that threshold as costs have increased over time. It does not include vehicular equipment. It does not include repairs or maintenance costing less than $100,000. Or that are emergency in nature, and it does not include salaries, except for those that are capitalized as part of a project. So we do have, architects and engineers and those types of salaries that are included in the capital budget. We have a subset of city agencies that participate in the capital budget process. So the operating budget includes every city agency. The capital budget process really focuses on 8 city agencies. And so you see the participating agencies listed here. The Department of General Services really prepares the capital budget on behalf of the remaining city agencies. So they include requests for city office buildings, our health centers, our senior centers, our libraries, our service centers, convention center, police and fire stations, the building that you're sitting in today. All of that is managed by DGS. So here are some examples of capital projects. I think these should be, pretty familiar to the commission at this point. Just wanted to quickly review the process for formulating recommendations. So this process takes almost a full year. We start the process in September and October by providing agencies with guidance and with likely funding levels. So you heard in the last presentation, Director Tarbert was talking about kind of what their likely funding level was, the guidance that we had given them about kind of what levels they could make requests within. That's what he was referring to. We provide that guidance, telling them that they can submit, up to $3 million for FY26 in general obligation bonds. In November and December, we review the requests with agencies. So we meet with them before they make the submission. We meet with them again after they make the submission, really push them to provide complete data, to make sure all of their requests are capital in nature, that they're really thinking through kind of what their priorities are, and submitting requests that are related to what's going on in terms of planning efforts that are happening, things that are happening through neighborhood subcabinet, all of that we're flagging for them during that review process. In December, agencies make their final submissions of the projects for consideration. And then here we are today with the agencies making presentations to Planning Commission. So we have 4 presentations today, and then we'll have another 4 presentations for you next week. And this is really an opportunity for you to ask the commission questions at the end of this presentation. I have a list of some questions that you may want to consider as you're listening to the presentations. I think there were excellent questions offered for the first presentation this morning. And really think about kind of what recommendations you want to make, what priorities you want to set as we get into February, into the working session. So in February, we will bring to the commission a set of recommendations that are balanced, that are within our budget constraints. And then you have an opportunity to really ask us questions and to say, well, what about this? And this is really a priority, and why aren't we funding this? And then we'll go back and make adjustments based on those comments and bring you a revised set of recommendations for you to vote on in March. So the last couple of years, there really hasn't been a lot of that exchange with the commission, but there really is an opportunity. If you want to voice what your priorities are, want to make some shifts, want to look at some different things, there's an opportunity to do that. We can also set up a work session prior to February, if that would be helpful. But in February, we'll bring you kind of a complete and balanced set of recommendations. The commission votes on the recommendations in March. That's for the full 6-year program. And then the Board of Finance votes in April or later in March. And then the Board of Estimates votes in May. They're voting on the full 6-year program. The council is really focused on the budget year. So they are voting on the ordinance of estimates, which only includes the first year of the 6-year program. So those key dates, again, for the commission are the agency presentations, which are today and next week, the Planning Commission work session, which is scheduled for February 27th, and then the Planning Commission vote, which is March 13th. So I wanted to talk through some of the things that we changed for this year's budget cycle. I already mentioned that we started the planning process for FY26 through 31 with the prior year's approved CIP. So rather than agencies starting with a blank sheet of paper, they were starting with what was approved last year, and then they were able to make changes. So you will see that it is different from what was approved last year. But we asked them to provide some information about why they were making changes, and we will be providing you with a report that has a brief explanation about why changes were made. Was it because there was a change in the cost estimate? Was it because there was a change in priority? We have kind of a list of about a half dozen reasons why changes were made, and so we'll have that report available for you shortly. We also asked agencies to budget by project phase for the first time, so that when you see the request, you're not just seeing a request for dollars, you're seeing whether those dollars are being requested for design, or whether those dollars are being requested for construction, or whether those dollars are being requested kind of for another aspect if it's post-construction. And so we think that will be really helpful in understanding kind of what are we funding, what is the stage of this project, are we fully funding design in a single year, are we fully funding construction in a single year. So that, in keeping with the budget director's kind of advice this morning, we've asked agencies to submit requests where we're funding all of a phase in a single fiscal year. And for the most part, agencies did submit their requests in that manner. We have some exceptions that we'll be reviewing, but for the most part, you'll see a very different set of requests than you've seen in the past, where requests were spread over, 4 or 5 years to accumulate funds. Now we are focusing on fully funding a project before moving on to the next project. We are also, with this year's budget process, focusing the capital budget very consciously on state of good repair. So we are identifying which projects are focused on state of good repair versus which projects are new assets. And we will be providing you with information about what % of the budget is going to state of good repair, and really focusing on state of good repair. In last year's program, we had set aside funds for state of good repair, just kind of in a general pot, and we will be making recommendations about using those funds for state of good repair. So those don't show in the requests yet, but we will be making those recommendations. That said, we have reserved some funds for special projects. So with the increase in the GEO bond level, we have the ability to fund some larger projects that maybe weren't possible before, and so we've reserved some of the increase in the GEO bonds to fund some of those special projects. We, this year, are, and I think we will do this more in future years, are distinguishing between projects and programs. And the way that you might think about this is a project is kind of a discrete project that has a beginning and a middle and an end. It is a location. We're building the Charm City TV incubator, for example. Whereas a program is something that's ongoing, such as the citywide facade program. So just to kind of think about the presentation that you just heard from BDC, those are kind of two examples, one being a project, the other being a program. And the goal really is to ask for different sets of data for projects and programs, because there's different things that are important for the projects versus the programs. So for projects, we want to know the cost estimate. We want to understand the phases. We want to understand the location. For programs, we really want to understand what the optimal funding level is. Like if we were funding this on a cycle basis and replacing all of our playgrounds on schedule, how many playgrounds do we need to be replacing each year? How much does it cost to replace the average playground? How long does a playground last? So if we know that, we can calculate kind of how much should we be spending each year to keep our playgrounds in a state of good repair? And can we move towards that funding level? And then the last thing I wanted to note here in terms of new guidance for FY26 to 31 is that you may see a lot less appropriations for state and federal funds because we are making sure that agencies have a grant agreement in place or grant work tag in place in order to request that funding. So we want to make sure that we're not budgeting these kind of in an anticipatory way, that we really do have those funds secured before we are budgeting them. So you'll see those in the outer years in an anticipatory fashion, but for the budget year, those are funds that the agencies receive on a recurring basis. Recreation and Parks, receives program open space funds on a recurring basis. You will see those, and then if an agency has applied for a grant and been awarded that grant, then you will see those in the capital budget as well. But you won't see things that just like, oh, we're planning to apply for this. That's not gonna show in the budget year. Any questions on any of this new guidance? Yes.
I'm sorry to be predictable, but you know what I'm going to ask about. I'm sorry. I'm a one-trick pony, I'm sorry. Schools. Slide 9. Okay,
There's a little bit of an exception to everything.
okay, right. That's what
but-
I was going to ask. They're outliers, so the issue about what you just went over, because unless it's systemic, they tend to be multi-year projects, especially like City, Poly, Western, so that doesn't apply.
It does not apply to schools at this point. Schools is, what's really guiding the school CIP process is the state CIP process. And so we really kind of are complementing that process in the case of schools. So it's a little bit different.
Just wanted to clarify, because I didn't know if, I'm sorry. I didn't know whether they had changed their approach. Okay, thank you,
No,
Sarah.
yeah, you will see them as an outlier. And you will not see a presentation from them today or next week because they presented to you in the fall. So again, because their capital budget process is really being driven by the state process, they are on a different cycle and they follow a little bit of different guidance than the rest of our agencies.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? It's a good question. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to do quickly before we get back to our agency presentations is give you an update on where we are with the project accounting progress. I think Kristen, spoke to the commission several times about the challenges that we had with the transition to Workday and with the quality of the data and the organization of the data, the availability of data, all of those different things. So I wanted to update you on where we are. The hierarchies and cost centers and work tags have all been corrected. The appropriations that were missing in Workday from before 2009 have been restored. We are almost through with correcting revenue categories. So when data was brought over from our old system into Workday, for whatever reason, a decision was made to have just a few revenue categories rather than the dozens of revenue categories that we had in the old system. And so a lot of things were coded as general funds, even though they were in fact not general funds. And then we also lost a lot of details. Some things were brought over incorrectly. So for all except 2 agencies, the revenue categories have been corrected, and those 2 are in the process of being corrected by the Bureau of Accounting and Payroll Services as we speak. So the next things that are on our horizon are to consolidate where we have multiple PRJs, that's our unique identifier for our project accounts, for what is in reality the same project. So if you think about, the Park Heights Library, that is one project, the Park Heights Library, but we might have a PRJ for a reserve account for the Park Heights Library and a PRJ for the active account for the Park Heights Library, and another one that showed up for some reason or another because of kind of how this has all played out over the last few years. And so we're making an effort with our agency partners to consolidate those so that we have a single PRJ for a single project so that we can see the real balance and report that data to you and use that data for our decision making. So that is underway. We are also underway in implementing appropriation work tags and funding source rules. We cannot currently see the balance in a project by funding source. So we can see the total balance, but we can't see how much of that balance is general funds and how much of that balance is general obligation bonds and how much of that balance is state revenue. And so if we want to reallocate, we don't know whether that balance is actually state revenue that can't be reallocated because it has to be used on that particular project. So we are implementing a huge effort to put in place appropriation work tags and funding source rules that will allow us to see the balances by funding source, and that is underway. And then the last step here, which is not underway yet because we need to do steps 4 and 5 first, is to clean up old appropriations and close out projects. So there was a question earlier about unallocated reserves. Most of the funding that's sitting in those unallocated reserves are not appropriations that are usable. And so we just want to get those off the books. And so we will be going through a process to identify all those appropriations that should be deappropriated and removed because they're basically ghost appropriations that are in our system. And then closing out projects that are ready to be closed. So this is kind of where we are and what we have left to do in terms of project accounting. And if we make it through all of those steps, which I am very optimistic about, by the end of this fiscal year, then this summer we have some exciting goals. So we want to be able to provide a report on project balances by revenue category. We will be able to do that if we've completed those steps on the prior slide. That will allow us to reallocate funding, old funding that's sitting in accounts that maybe isn't needed to be sitting in those accounts to what our current priorities are. Everyone's very anxious to do that. I know the commission's anxious. I know the mayor's office is anxious. I know we're anxious to do that. But we can't do that until we've completed, all of those prior steps. We also want to completely revise the transfer process. I think this commission has talked about the order of operations between Board of Estimates and Planning Commission, the data that we receive from agencies, the very manual process. It's time for it to be completely updated. So we want to tackle that this summer. And then this is maybe a little bit more internal for my own sanity, but the last item is that before we start next year's process, I would like to revise the data entry process. Right now, we are collecting data in 3 different places, and it's very hard, I think, for both the agencies as well as for our team to make sure that we have complete data and to review everything kind of all as one complete picture. So we want to make that more streamlined for everyone. So that's what we have on the horizon. So it'll be a very busy summer, but it is dependent on those accounting improvements, some of which are beyond our agency's control. We're working with another agency on that, as well as with some outside consultants. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight some resources that are available for you. In addition to the presentations that are on your WIC site, there's also 2 reports that are on your website, on your WIC site. These are essentially spreadsheets with all of the agency requests. So one of the reports is organized by project, and so if you look at that one, it is much longer, but it has all of the funding sources, listed under the project. So you can see the project listed once, and you can see all of the funding sources for that project. The second one is organized by revenue category. So you can see all of the projects for recreation and parks that are funded with general obligation bonds, and then you can see all of the projects that are funded with state resources and all of the projects. I don't think they have any federal, but if they did, you'd see all of the ones that are with federal grants. But you might see a project listed twice or 3 times because they might be getting general obligation bonds and state funds, for the same project. So those are really the same data presented in 2 different ways for you to access. By the end of the day, we will have a 3rd report available for you. It may be available now. I just need to get it onto your Wix page, which has agency request details. And this is the report that you saw for the first time last year that has a full page summary for each request. So you can see the description, you can see a little location map, you can see, the request by phase, you can see the request by funding source, looking at each request. It is hundreds of pages long, but it's an excellent resource, and the best way to use it is really to use Control F to basically use the find. And you can search for a project by name, you can search for a project by keyword, you can search, by PRJ number. But it's probably not something that you're going to scroll through for 700 pages. But that's a resource that we will have available to you very shortly. And then the last one is the one that I mentioned earlier that we will have available to you prior to the work session. And that's comparing the agency requests and last year's approved CIPs, so you can see what those differences are. So this last slide is really meant for you to use as you're taking in all of the information today from agencies to think about why the projects that are being presented to you are a priority. And questions that you might ask is this a legal mandate? Is this furthering equity? Is this addressing health and safety? Is this addressing the condition of an asset? Is this, providing the city excellent return on investment? What is the environmental impact of the proposed project? And is this the most efficient and effective way to solve for whatever it is that the agency is trying to solve for? So I think you'll see a lot of this information presented by agencies, but these are, the types of questions that you might consider asking. And that's what I have for you today.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
A little bit over.
This has been a huge lift, and you've done a great job leading this effort. When we asked a lot of these questions 2 years ago, it wasn't even clear if they could be answered. And now, it seems like you're over the hump and working towards, huge improvements that are going to increase transparency. So thank you for that. Any other questions from Sarah?
Thank you again. Just one semi-selfish question. Do you have this list of projects broken down by council district? Is that possible?
I do not currently, but it is, for those that have a location, it is something that I think we can do.
Great.
So this last slide is on your iPad if you want it during the day.
Great. Any other questions from the commission?